A loud hiss echoed through the executive office before sunrise, and everyone would later blame a broken espresso machine. They had no idea that the real problem had walked out of the building the day before with nothing more than an old canvas bag and 21 years of forgotten loyalty. They thought they had fired an ordinary employee. In reality, they had pushed aside the one person quietly holding their entire company together. My name is Vanessa Brooks, and for more than 2 decades, I was the invisible heartbeat of a fast-growing technology company in downtown Chicago. Every morning I unlocked the front door before anyone else arrived, usually around 6:45. While executives slept comfortably and managers prepared motivational speeches, I made sure the building actually worked. If a pipe leaked, I fixed it. If the heating system failed during winter, I handled it. When the network closet overheated or the security system malfunctioned, everyone somehow expected me to have the answer. I never complained because I honestly believed the company appreciated dedication, even if they rarely said it out loud. The truth was that my official title changed several times over the years, but my actual responsibilities multiplied faster than anyone could count. Some people still thought I worked at the reception desk even though I managed facilities, operations, vendor contracts, maintenance schedules, emergency repairs, and a dozen other jobs nobody wanted. My inbox was always overflowing with urgent requests from people who could not replace a printer cartridge without declaring a workplace emergency. Whenever something stopped working, my phone rang before anyone even considered checking the instruction manual. The younger employees often laughed about how I somehow knew every corner of that building. They joked that I could probably find a hidden water valve blindfolded or identify a faulty electrical breaker just by listening to the walls. They were not entirely wrong. After 21 years, I knew every strange sound, every stubborn door, every temperamental air conditioner, and every shortcut hidden inside that property. It had become almost like another home, and I treated it with more care than many people treated their own houses. Unfortunately, the company changed as it grew. The friendly startup culture slowly disappeared beneath expensive suits, polished presentations, and executives who loved talking about innovation while forgetting the people who built the foundation. Every new vice president promised exciting changes, but somehow those changes always meant cutting experienced employees while hiring consultants who charged more in a week than I earned in several months. The newest arrival was our human resources director, Brittany Lawson. She had impressive degrees hanging on her office wall and enough confidence to fill the entire building. Unfortunately, she had almost no practical experience. During her first week, she actually asked me where the internet cable connected to the computers because she assumed every office had one giant master plug somewhere. I smiled politely and showed her the equipment room, realizing almost immediately that common sense was becoming optional inside corporate America. Even then, I kept doing my job without expecting applause. I stayed late after everyone else left whenever storms flooded the basement. I cleaned break rooms after company parties because the executives always disappeared before the mess became their responsibility. I once spent 4 hours repairing damaged wiring after someone overloaded the electrical system by plugging 3 expensive coffee machines into the same circuit. Nobody thanked me afterward. One manager simply handed me half of his protein bar and called me by the wrong name before rushing into another meeting. Moments like that should have warned me. But loyalty has a funny way of convincing people that tomorrow will finally bring appreciation. Instead, tomorrow kept bringing more work. I negotiated service contracts, coordinated office renovations, supervised emergency repairs, and solved problems nobody else even noticed. Most employees assumed these things happened automatically. They never realized someone quietly stayed behind every evening making sure their comfortable workday could continue. What almost nobody remembered was how the company began. Back then there were only 5 employees sharing a tiny office with outdated computers and secondhand furniture. Banks refused to help them, landlords ignored them, and investors laughed at their business plan. The founder had practically begged me to help secure office space because my credit history was stronger than the entire company combined. Wanting to support people I considered family, I agreed to sign the lease under my own name until the business became stable. Everyone promised the arrangement would only be temporary. Once the company succeeded, they would transfer everything properly. Years passed, profits exploded, executives changed, and somehow nobody ever mentioned the lease again. I continued reviewing the paperwork because it was easier than interrupting everyone with legal details. Besides, I trusted them completely. Looking back, that was probably my biggest mistake. One Monday afternoon, an email appeared in my calendar with almost no explanation. The subject simply said Human Resources Meeting. I had watched enough layoffs over the years to recognize exactly what that invitation meant. My stomach tightened, but I still walked into the conference room the following morning wearing my favorite gray cardigan, determined to keep my dignity regardless of what happened. Brittany greeted me with an overly cheerful smile that never reached her eyes. Beside her sat an unfamiliar attorney holding a folder that already told me everything before anyone spoke. After a few rehearsed sentences about restructuring and organizational direction, they slid the severance package across the table. 3 months of pay, temporary insurance, and paperwork that even listed my name incorrectly after more than 2 decades of service. The attorney politely requested my identification badge, office keys, and any company property in my possession. I carefully placed every key onto the table one by one. Then I looked directly at Brittany and quietly asked whether she was absolutely certain this was the decision they wanted to make. She repeated the same corporate speech about difficult business choices and assured me nothing was personal. I stood, picked up my purse, and gave them one final look before walking toward the door. "You are not firing someone you understand," I said calmly. "You are firing someone you never bothered to know." Neither of them realized those would become the most expensive words the company would ever ignore. I walked out of the building without looking back, but I did not drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into a quiet parking lot with a cup of coffee and called the only person I trusted with legal matters. His name was Ethan Carter, a real estate attorney I had known since he was a teenager mowing lawns in my neighborhood. When I explained what had happened, he listened without interrupting. Then I asked him one simple question. "Did you ever remove my name from that original lease?" There was a long pause before he answered, "No, Vanessa. According to the records, you are still the legal tenant." For the first time since the meeting, I smiled. It was not because I wanted revenge. It was because I finally understood how carelessly they had treated everything I built. When I returned home, I opened an old filing cabinet in my hallway where I had kept every important document from the last 20 years. Buried inside a bright folder was the original lease agreement, every renewal, every amendment, and every signature. I sat at my kitchen table reading page after page until one detail stopped me cold. The lease renewal deadline had passed 2 days earlier, and nobody from the company had submitted the required paperwork. I checked it 3 times because I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The executives had spent years acting like they owned the building, yet they had completely forgotten the legal agreement that kept them inside it. Even worse, every important contract connected to the property still listed my name. Utility accounts, maintenance agreements, vendor approvals, and insurance records all pointed back to me. They had fired the person responsible for the building without realizing the building itself still depended on her. Ethan confirmed everything the following morning. Since the renewal had been missed, the lease automatically converted to a month-to-month agreement under my authority. Legally, I had every right to terminate it. I spent the next few days meeting with the property manager, who looked genuinely shocked when he discovered the company had ignored every notice about renewing the lease. He apologized repeatedly, assuming someone inside the company had been handling the paperwork. I calmly explained that they had fired the only person who ever did. As fate would have it, another business had already expressed interest in renting the office space months earlier. It was a successful wellness technology company looking for a downtown headquarters. Their founder remembered meeting me at a local business event and had mentioned how much she admired the building. Within days we reached an agreement. They offered fair market rent, respected every legal requirement, and most importantly, treated me like a professional instead of an inconvenience. Once everything was signed, Ethan officially filed the lease termination and eviction paperwork. I did not celebrate, I simply felt something I had not experienced in years: relief. For the first time, I was no longer carrying the weight of an entire company that barely remembered my name. Several days later, my former employer received the court notice. At first they assumed it had been delivered by mistake. Reception set it aside without urgency while executives continued discussing investor presentations and expansion plans. Only after their attorneys reviewed the documents did panic spread through the office. My name appeared clearly on every page as the legal leaseholder. Suddenly, everyone remembered the quiet woman who had spent 21 years solving problems they never noticed. My phone began ringing nonstop, Former coworkers called asking if there had been some misunderstanding. Managers wanted to arrange meetings. Human resources sent polite emails requesting conversations. I ignored every message except one from an old maintenance technician who had always treated me with kindness. He simply wrote that the building had already felt different without me. I replied that sometimes people only notice the foundation after it disappears. That evening the company CEO finally called. His confident voice from countless board meetings had vanished, replaced by frustration and desperation. He insisted there had to be another solution and claimed the eviction would damage the company's reputation. I listened patiently before reminding him of something important. When you fired me, I asked whether you were absolutely certain. You said yes. Today I am equally certain. He argued that they had invested millions into the office. I reminded him that investments mean very little when basic responsibilities are ignored. He accused me of destroying the company. I calmly explained that I had spent 21 years protecting it. The only difference now was that I had finally stopped carrying everyone else while receiving nothing in return. Within 48 hours, county officials posted the final notice on the front entrance. Employees gathered in confused groups while moving companies loaded furniture into trucks. News spread quickly through local business circles. Reporters described it as a shocking corporate mistake caused by poor leadership and careless management. People who had never heard my name before suddenly wanted to know who had quietly held an entire organization together for more than 2 decades. A week later I drove past the building one final time. The old company was gone. Workers from the new tenant carried plants, furniture and boxes through the front entrance with excitement instead of panic. The building looked alive again. Before leaving, the new owner handed me a small gift basket with a handwritten note thanking me for helping them begin a new chapter. When I returned home, I opened a drawer and found the very first office key the founder had given me all those years ago. I polished the worn brass until it shined, then hung it beside my family photographs. It no longer unlocked any doors, but it reminded me of something far more valuable. Loyalty should never require someone to become invisible. Hard work deserves respect long before it becomes impossible to replace. I spent 21 years believing my value came from quietly fixing everyone else's problems. Losing that job taught me a different lesson. Sometimes the strongest move is not fighting to stay where you are ignored. Sometimes it is simply stepping aside and letting people discover exactly how much they depended on you all along. That company thought it had dismissed an ordinary employee. In reality, they had dismissed the person holding together the foundation beneath their success. By the time they realized the truth, it was far too late. I never shouted, never sought revenge, and never broke the law. I simply stopped protecting people who had forgotten my worth, and that decision changed every one of our lives forever.